wedding venue looked like something lifted out of a magazine. White marble floors, crystal chandeliers, walls lined with fresh flowers flown in from another country. Every detail spoke the same language: money. As guests arrived in tailored suits and shimmering dresses, their laughter filled the space easily, confidently, as if they belonged here by right. Daniel Hayes stood just inside the entrance, his hands folded calmly in front of him. He wore a simple dark suit, well-pressed but clearly not custom-made. He wasn't uncomfortable exactly, he was just aware of how little noise he made compared to everyone else. Aware of how eyes slid past him, then flicked back briefly, curious, dismissive, confused. Beside him stood Claire Whitmore. Claire was impossible to miss. The billionaire heiress carried herself with the ease of someone who had never needed to explain her place in a room. Her dress was elegant, understated in a way only extreme wealth could afford. She greeted relatives, donors, and executives with polite warmth, introducing Daniel simply as, "My guest." No title, no explanation. That alone drew attention. Whispers followed them as they moved deeper into the hall. "Who's he? Isn't she usually more selective? He doesn't look like her type." Daniel heard none of it directly, but he felt it. He always did. Years of being underestimated had sharpened that sense. Still, he said nothing. He smiled when spoken to. He thanked servers. He stayed one step behind Claire, not out of submission but habit. Making space had become second nature. Claire noticed. She noticed how he didn't reach for champagne without asking. How he thanked staff by name when their badges were visible. How he listened more than he spoke. She had invited him knowing this would happen. Knowing the contrast would be stark. What she hadn't expected was the quiet steadiness he carried into a room built to intimidate. "You okay?" she asked softly as they paused near a floral arch. Daniel nodded. "It's beautiful. Your sister has good taste." Claire smiled. "She does. She also has very high expectations." Daniel understood expectations. He had lived under them since the day his wife died and left him alone with a 2-year-old and a life that suddenly felt too heavy to lift. He had learned to meet expectations quietly, without applause. He adjusted his cuffs and scanned the room, grounding himself. The ceremony hadn't started yet. Guests mingled. Laughter rose and fell. Daniel felt out of place, but not ashamed. That was an important difference. He hadn't come to impress anyone. He had come because Claire asked him to, and because Lily, his daughter, had squeezed his hand that morning and said, "Be brave, Daddy." Claire introduced him to a few family members. Polite smiles, brief nods. One cousin asked, "So what do you do?" in the careful tone people used when they expected an unimpressive answer. "I work in logistics," Daniel said simply. "Oh," the cousin replied, interest fading instantly. "That's important." Daniel smiled anyway. As they took their seats, Daniel noticed the groom for the first time. Tall, confident, expensive suit. He laughed loudly, clapping a hand on another man's shoulder. The kind of laugh that assumed agreement. Daniel's gaze lingered only a second before he looked away. Faces blended together at events like this. None of them mattered to him. He didn't notice the groom stiffen the moment his eyes landed on Daniel. The ceremony began. Music swelled. Claire's sister walked down the aisle, radiant. Applause followed. Daniel stood when everyone else did, clapping politely, sincerely. He respected moments like this. Commitment meant something to him. As vows were exchanged, Daniel's thoughts drifted briefly to Lily, to bedtime stories, to school lunches, to the small apartment that waited for him afterward. He felt no envy, just distance. This world was not his, and that was fine. Then came the reception. Glasses clinked. Servers moved like clockwork. Conversations grew louder. Daniel remained composed, answering questions when asked, never volunteering more than necessary. He felt Claire glance at him now and then, checking in without drawing attention. They were standing near the head table when it happened. The groom turned fully toward them for the first time. His smile faltered. He stared. Color drained from his face so quickly it was impossible to miss. His hand tightened around his glass. The chatter around them faded as his focus locked onto Daniel, eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel felt it then, that sudden shift in the air. He looked up, meeting the groom's stare with mild confusion. The groom took a step forward. "Boss," he said. The word hit the room like dropped glass. Silence spread outward in waves. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Claire's sister looked between her husband and Daniel, baffled. Claire felt her spine straighten. Daniel blinked once. Slowly. "Hello, Mark," he said calmly. The groom swallowed hard. I didn't know it was you." Whispers erupted instantly. "Did he just say boss? Boss of what? Do they know each other?" Claire turned to Daniel, her expression unreadable. "You know him?" Daniel nodded slightly. "We worked together. A long time ago." Mark laughed nervously. "Worked together? You ran the whole operation. You—" He stopped himself, glancing around, suddenly aware of the audience. "You're the reason I'm standing here." The room buzzed. Daniel felt the weight of every eye on him now, the same eyes that had slid past him earlier. He didn't straighten. He didn't smile wider. He didn't claim the moment. "It was a long time ago," he said evenly. Mark shook his head. "No. You gave me my first chance. You taught me everything. You walked away when you could have taken credit for all of it." Claire's heart began to race. Daniel said nothing. The groom lowered his voice, emotion breaking through. "You left so I could move up. And you never asked for anything." Daniel glanced briefly at Claire, then back at Mark. "I asked for time," he said. "That was enough." The silence deepened, no longer awkward, heavy, curious, respectful. Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not pride, closure. And as the room stared at the quiet single father they had dismissed minutes earlier, one truth became impossible to ignore. They had misjudged him completely. The silence did not break all at once. It fractured slowly, like thin ice under too much weight. Murmurs spread across the reception hall, guests leaning toward one another, eyes still fixed on Daniel as if he had suddenly changed shape. Moments ago he had been invisible. Now he was the axis around which the room turned. Claire felt it most sharply. She had brought Daniel here knowing he would be judged. But she had not expected this. Not recognition. Not history rising from the past with such force. She studied his face, searching for triumph or resentment. There was neither. Only calm. Mark, the groom, cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. "I didn't mean to cause a scene," he said quickly, voice tight. "It's just, I never thought I'd see you again." Daniel nodded once. "Life changes," he said. "People take different paths." Mark laughed softly, the sound edged with nerves. "You took the hardest one." Someone nearby scoffed under their breath, but Daniel ignored it. He had learned long ago that explanations rarely satisfied people who didn't want to understand. Claire noticed how naturally he carried himself under attention. No defensiveness, no performance, just presence. Claire's sister, the bride, finally spoke. "Mark," she said gently, "do you want to explain?" Mark hesitated, then straightened, as if bracing himself. "Daniel was my supervisor years ago, before the company grew, before investors, before any of this." He gestured vaguely around the room. "He built the systems everyone else took credit for. When his wife died, he stepped away, gave up everything, left me in charge." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "You just left?" someone asked. Daniel met the question calmly. "I had a child who needed me." Claire's chest tightened. The simplicity of his answer silenced any follow-up. No justification, no bitterness, just fact. As the reception resumed, conversations shifted. People approached Daniel now with interest thinly veiled as admiration. Questions flowed about the past, about his work, about how he could walk away from success. Daniel answered politely but briefly, never indulging curiosity more than necessary. He deflected praise. He redirected attention. He remained the same man he had been when no one cared. Claire watched it all, unsettled in the best possible way. Later, as they stepped onto the terrace for air, Claire finally spoke. "You never told me." Daniel leaned against the railing, looking out over the city lights. "You didn't ask." She smiled faintly. "I suppose I didn't. Because it doesn't matter," he added. "Not anymore." Claire considered that. "It matters to them." Daniel shrugged. "Then it's their lesson to learn." They stood in companionable silence. The noise of the reception faded behind them. Claire felt something settle into clarity. This wasn't about surprise or power or even justice. It was about alignment. Daniel's life made sense in a way hers rarely did. Inside, Mark struggled. Pride and gratitude warred with embarrassment. He watched Daniel from across the room, realizing how small his own sacrifices had been by comparison. Success had rewarded him loudly. Daniel's choices had been quieter and heavier. Mark approached again, this time alone. "I owe you more than I ever said," he admitted. Daniel met his gaze. "You owe your family honesty." "That's enough." Mark nodded slowly. "You deserved more." Daniel smiled gently. "I have what I need." Claire heard the exchange and felt it land deep. Wealth had taught her how to acquire. Daniel had taught her how to choose. As the night wore on, Claire noticed something else. People had stopped asking Daniel what he did. They asked who he was. They asked about Lily, about his life, about values. The room itself felt different, quieter somehow, as if recalibrating. When it was time to leave, Claire touched Daniel's arm. "Ready?" He nodded. "Yes." As they walked toward the exit, guests parted instinctively, respect replacing dismissal. Daniel acknowledged them kindly but did not linger. Outside, the night air felt cool and grounding. In the car, neither spoke at first. "You okay?" Claire asked finally. "Yes," Daniel said. "Are you?" She exhaled. "I think so. I just didn't realize how rarely I see people like you." Daniel looked at her. "People like me?" "People who choose responsibility when no one is watching." He considered that. "It's not a virtue," he said. "It's a necessity." Claire smiled, understanding something fundamental. Power revealed itself loudly. Responsibility endured quietly. As they drove away from the wedding, Daniel thought of Lily waiting at home with the neighbor he trusted. He felt steady. He had not lost himself in a room designed to swallow people whole. Claire watched the city lights pass and felt changed. Not because Daniel had been recognized, but because he hadn't needed to be. Behind them, the wedding would be remembered for many things. For beauty, for excess, for celebration. But for some, it would be remembered as the night they learned the difference between status and substance. The morning after the wedding arrived without ceremony. No headlines, no applause, just routine. Daniel woke before dawn, as he always did, listening for the small sounds that told him Lily was still asleep. He brewed coffee quietly, letting the steam fog the kitchen window, grounding himself in the ordinary. The night before had been loud with revelation, but mornings belonged to responsibility. Lily padded into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Did you have fun?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "Yes, it was interesting." She nodded, satisfied with that. Children rarely needed more than honesty trimmed to their size. As Daniel walked her to school later, he felt the weight of what had resurfaced. The past he rarely visited had followed him home. Mark's words echoed despite his effort to dismiss them. "You deserved more." Daniel had heard that sentence many times in different forms. He never agreed with it. More was a dangerous idea. More usually asked for something in return. At the office, the shift was immediate. Emails arrived marked urgent from people who had never noticed him before. Invitations appeared. A vice president stopped by his desk to check in. Daniel accepted none of it emotionally. He responded politely, professionally, maintaining the same pace he always had. But he felt the imbalance. Recognition came late, and it rarely came clean. Claire noticed too. She arrived later that day, watching the subtle rearrangement of attention around Daniel like pieces sliding into new positions. It unsettled her. Not because Daniel was being respected, but because he had earned it long ago without receiving it. She wondered how many people she herself had overlooked simply because they didn't announce their value. That afternoon, she asked Daniel to join her for a walk outside the building. "I didn't realize how much of yourself you gave up," she said carefully. Daniel considered her words. "I didn't give myself up," he replied. "I redirected." "To Lily," Claire said. "Yes." They walked in silence for a moment. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Daniel stopped. He thought of hospital rooms, of nights calculating groceries instead of investments, of watching Mark rise while he stayed behind. "No," he said firmly, "but I do carry it." Claire nodded. She understood carrying weight, but hers had always been visible. Daniel's had been invisible, and therefore heavier. Later that week, Daniel received a call he hadn't expected. "Mark, I've been thinking," Mark said, "about what I owe you. There's an opening. Senior role. You deserve." "No," Daniel interrupted gently. Mark sighed. "At least let me try." "Trying would cost me time," Daniel said. "And time is the one thing I won't trade." Silence followed. "I don't know how you live like that," Mark admitted. Daniel answered quietly. "You do. You just call it something else." After the call ended, Daniel sat still, feeling the old ache resurface. Not longing, not bitterness, just the gravity of roads not taken. Sacrifice was easier to justify when no one noticed. Being seen made it heavier. Claire felt the shift in him that evening. "You're quieter," she said. "I'm remembering," he replied. "Does it hurt?" "Only when I try to explain it." She didn't push. Instead, she listened as Daniel spoke about early mornings with Lily, about choosing stability over ambition, about watching others surpass him while he stayed where he was needed. He didn't frame it as loss, but Claire heard the cost anyway. "I've never had to choose like that," she admitted. Daniel smiled gently. "Everyone chooses. Yours just came with applause." That night, Claire lay awake thinking about inheritance, about advantage, about how little she had ever been asked to give up. The wedding had revealed more than Daniel's past. It had exposed the imbalance she had lived inside without questioning. The next day, Claire made a decision. She declined a lucrative expansion deal that would have required mass layoffs. The board resisted. Investors complained. She held her ground. For the first time, she measured success not by growth, but by preservation. Daniel noticed. He didn't comment. The pressure increased. Media followed. Analysts speculated. Claire stood firm, carrying criticism she would once have dismissed as irrelevant. Now it mattered. Choices echoed. One evening, Lily asked Claire a question while coloring at the kitchen table. "Why do grown-ups argue so much?" she asked. Claire paused. "Because choices are hard." Lily nodded. "My dad chooses me." Claire felt something tighten. "Yes," she said. "He does." The weight of that choice settled fully then. Not as burden but as truth. Daniel stood in the doorway watching them, feeling the past loosen its grip. He hadn't lost himself. He had simply invested differently. Seeing Claire learn that without being told felt like quiet justice. The world outside continued to reward louder sacrifices, bigger risks, flashier losses. But inside the small orbit something steadier formed. A recognition not demanded, but earned. Daniel carried the weight of what he had given up. But he also carried proof that it had not been wasted. And for the first time that felt enough. Respect did not announce itself with applause. It arrived quietly, changing the shape of rooms without moving the furniture. Daniel felt it first at work, not in words, but in pauses. People waited when he spoke now. They asked instead of assuming. The shift was subtle enough to deny, yet firm enough to feel. Power, he knew, resisted being rewritten, preferred familiar ink. Claire experienced that resistance head-on. The decision she'd made to halt the expansion tied to layoffs had consequences that arrived swiftly and without patience. Calls stacked. Meetings multiplied. Advisors warned her about sentimentality dressed up as ethics. She listened without yielding, learning which voices spoke from fear and which from conviction. Daniel watched from a distance. He didn't insert himself. He understood that leadership, when tested, needed space to prove itself. Still, he felt the weight of implication. The world liked clean narratives. It would look for a reason behind Claire's choices. It might land on him. One afternoon, a department head cornered Daniel near the elevators. "You've got influence now," the man said, smiling thinly. "You should use it." Daniel met his gaze. "Influence isn't something you use," he replied. "It's something people give or don't." The man laughed, uncomfortable, and walked away. Daniel exhaled slowly. Respect could be weaponized. He wouldn't allow that. Claire called a town hall. She stood on the stage without slides or prepared remarks. The room hummed with expectation. Employees wanted certainty. Investors wanted reassurance. Claire offered neither in the way they expected. "I won't pretend this decision is easy," she said. "It isn't. But if growth requires us to discard people as collateral, then it isn't growth I'm willing to defend." Murmurs rippled, some approving, some sharp. "I'm accountable for the outcomes," she continued, "and I accept that accountability." Questions followed, pointed, skeptical, fair. Claire answered each one without deflection. She didn't mention Daniel. She didn't frame the choice as moral theater. She spoke plainly, grounding power in responsibility. Daniel listened from the back, unseen again, and felt something align. Respect wasn't being borrowed. It was being built. After the town hall, Claire joined him outside. "They'll test this," she said. "They should," Daniel replied. "That's how you know it matters." She smiled faintly. "You're not worried?" "I'm cautious," he said. "There's a difference." The weeks that followed were uneasy. Markets dipped. Headlines speculated. Yet inside the company something steadied. Turnover slowed. Teams adjusted. Managers learned to plan without the threat of erasure. The culture shifted, not dramatically, but measurably. Daniel noticed it in small ways. A junior analyst asked for guidance without fear. A warehouse supervisor thanked him for backing a safety request. None of it traced back to him directly, and that was the point. Respect didn't need a signature. Claire's sister called one evening. "People still talk about the wedding," she said lightly. "I imagine they will," Claire replied. "They're saying Mark finally understood what success looks like." Claire glanced at Daniel across the room. Lily curled beside him on the couch. "Some lessons arrive late," she said. "But they arrive." At work, Mark requested a meeting with Claire. Alone. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for benefiting from a system I didn't question." Claire nodded. "What will you do differently?" Mark hesitated. "I don't know yet, but I'm learning where my power comes from." "That's a start," she said. Daniel heard about it later and felt no satisfaction. Only relief. Power rewritten by respect left fewer casualties. Then came the audit. External reviewers dug through processes with clinical precision. Claire welcomed it. Transparency was the currency of credibility. Daniel assisted where asked, careful not to lead the narrative. He refused offers to speak on behalf of leadership. "I speak for operations," he said simply. "That's enough." The report returned with criticism and commendation in equal measure. Systems were solid. Culture showed improvement. Risks were acknowledged. The company endured. At the next board meeting, a member addressed Claire directly. "Your authority remains intact," he said. "But it's different." Claire met his eyes. "Authority that can't change isn't authority," she replied. "It's inertia." Silence followed. Not agreement. Acceptance. That evening, Daniel and Claire walked through a quiet park. Leaves shifted underfoot. Lily ran ahead, collecting nothing in particular. "You didn't ask me to step back," Daniel said. "I won't," Claire replied. Respect doesn't require distance. It requires clarity. He nodded. Then be clear with me. I will choose decisions I can explain to a child, she said. Even when they cost me. Daniel considered that. Then I'll stay, he said. As long as my staying doesn't cost her. They stopped. Lily turned, waving a leaf like a flag. Are you coming? She called. Yes, Daniel said. Claire watched them move together, understanding something she hadn't before. Power rewritten by respect didn't diminish. It redistributed. It lifted without demanding submission. At work the next day, Daniel returned to routine. Reports, calls, quiet corrections. The respect remained, not loud, not ceremonial, but present. And because it was present, it could be trusted. Claire entered her office lighter than she'd been in months. The building felt less like a fortress and more like a place where people belonged. That was the rewrite. Not erasing power, but grounding it. When respect rewrote power, it did so line by line, choice by choice. And in the spaces between, something enduring took hold. Applause faded faster than anyone admitted. It always did. Daniel understood that better than most. Recognition flared bright, then disappeared, leaving behind the quieter truth of who people were when no one was watching. Weeks after the wedding and the company upheaval, life settled again. Not back to what it had been, but into something steadier. Mornings still began early. Daniel packed lunches, checked shoelaces, reminded Lily to zip her jacket. The world had not softened because people finally knew his past. Responsibility did not loosen its grip just because respect arrived late. If anything, it deepened. Being seen meant being measured. Lily noticed the difference before he did. People say your name differently, she said one morning. Daniel paused. Differently how? Like they're listening, she replied. He smiled. Children had a way of summarizing what adults complicated. At work, the changes endured. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. Meetings ran differently. Decisions took longer, not because of hesitation, but because voices once ignored were now included. Daniel didn't claim credit for that. Neither did Claire. It wasn't about authorship. It was about outcome. Claire faced quieter days now. Fewer interviews. Fewer speculative calls. The company stabilized, not without cost, but without collapse. Some investors left. Others stayed. What remained was more aligned than before. She accepted that alignment was not the same as approval. One evening, Claire joined Daniel and Lily for dinner at the small apartment that had become familiar to her. No luxury, no pretense, just warmth. Lily chattered about school. Daniel listened, fully present. Claire watched, understanding what endurance looked like up close. After Lily went to bed, Claire stood by the window, city lights blinking beyond glass she hadn't installed. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The version of you they finally saw? Daniel considered. No, he said, because that version was always there. They just caught up. She nodded. And now I make sure Lily never doubts what matters. Claire turned toward him. And what about you? Daniel met her gaze. I matter when she's safe, when she knows she's chosen. Everything else is noise. The simplicity of it settled heavily, beautifully. Claire realized something then. Endurance wasn't about preserving power or recognition. It was about protecting meaning. The company announced modest gains that quarter. Nothing sensational. Analysts called it conservative. Employees called it stable. Claire called it honest. She stood before the board and spoke plainly. We didn't win, she said. We held. Some frowned. Others nodded. Holding, she had learned, required strength the world rarely celebrated. Mark sent a message weeks later. A thank you without expectation. An apology without defense. Daniel replied kindly, briefly. Closure didn't need conversation. It needed acknowledgement. At school, Lily was asked to draw her family for an assignment. She drew 3 figures again. This time, the lines were steadier. She added a son in the corner. That's Claire, she explained. Daniel felt no rush, no alarm, just trust. Claire joined them at the park later that day, shoes kicked off, jacket folded beside her. She listened as Lily explained the rules of a game she'd invented. Claire followed them without question. That Daniel noticed was the difference. Power listened now. As months passed, invitations slowed. Headlines moved on. New stories replaced old ones. But inside the small orbit they had built, nothing retreated. It grew quieter, stronger. One evening, as Daniel locked up the office, a young employee stopped him. "I wanted to say thank you," she said nervously, "for showing me I don't have to choose between my life and my work." Daniel smiled. "You choose every day," he said. "Just choose honestly." She nodded, holding on to that. Claire waited outside, coat draped over her arm. "Ready?" "Yes," Daniel said. They walked together, not as spectacle, not as statement, but as people who had aligned their steps carefully. Lily ran ahead, laughing, certain she would be followed. Claire spoke quietly. "If tomorrow everything changed again," Daniel finished the thought, "we'd still be us." She smiled. That was endurance. What endured after the applause was not recognition, but rhythm. Not power, but responsibility. Not admiration, but trust built slowly, deliberately, without witnesses. Daniel tucked Lily into bed that night, reading the same story she always asked for. Claire sat nearby, listening. No one applauded. No one needed to. Outside, the city moved on, hungry for the next revelation. Inside, something far less visible held steady. And that was enough.